Today I'm going to tell you about 35-year-old Dr. Omar's story from Gaza, Palestine. On one of the darkest nights in the history of Al-Shifa Hospital, he faced the most impossible decision any doctor should ever have to make. There was only one ambulance left, but 3 patients who desperately needed to reach safety. Who would he choose? And how did this choice haunt him forever? Imagine being a doctor, sworn to save every life, but forced to choose who lives and who dies. I know this might be difficult to hear, but imagine if this were your own father making such an impossible decision. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel so we can keep sharing these important stories from Palestine. Which patient did Dr. Omar choose? And what happened to those he couldn't save? Stay with me until the end to find out. 35-year-old Dr. Omar Khalil had been working at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, Palestine, for 12 years. He was a trauma surgeon who had dedicated his entire life to healing others. With his graying beard and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering, Omar was known throughout the hospital as the doctor who never gave up on any patient. Omar had grown up in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. His own father had been a paramedic, and from a young age, Omar knew he wanted to follow in his footsteps, to serve his people, to bring hope where there was despair. He had studied medicine in Cairo, Egypt, but always knew he would return to Palestine, to serve in the place where he was needed most. For over a decade, Dr. Omar had worked tirelessly in the emergency department of Al-Shifa. He had delivered babies during the worst of times, performed surgeries without proper equipment, and saved countless lives with nothing but his skill and determination. His colleagues called him the guardian angel of Gaza, because no matter how dark the situation became, he always found a way to help. Omar was married to Layla, a teacher at a local school, and they had 2 children together, 15-year-old Amjad and 12-year-old Noor. Every morning before leaving for the hospital, Omar would kiss his children goodbye and promise them he would return home safely. "Papa will always come back to you," he would say with a smile, not knowing how prophetic those words would become. The people of Gaza had learned to live with uncertainty, with the constant threat of violence, with the knowledge that any day could bring tragedy. But Dr. Omar represented hope in their community. Mothers would bring their sick children specifically to him. Elderly patients would wait hours just to be treated by the doctor who treated everyone like family. If this story is touching your heart so far, please give it a like. Can you imagine if your own father was a doctor trying to save lives in such impossible conditions? Let's continue. October 21st was supposed to be a quiet night at Al-Shifa Hospital. Dr. Omar had been on duty for 18 hours straight, treating patients who had nowhere else to go. The hospital was overcrowded, understaffed, and running low on medical supplies, but Omar and his team continued to work miracles with what little they had. At around 10:30 in the evening, Omar was finally taking a short break in the staff room. He was thinking about his children at home, wondering if they had finished their homework, if Layla had managed to find bread at the market that day. These small thoughts of normal family life kept him grounded during the most difficult moments. But his peaceful moment was shattered when Hassan, the head nurse, burst into the room with panic in his eyes. "Dr. Omar," he said breathlessly, "we have a situation. The northern districts are being evacuated. The ambulances, most of them have been damaged or destroyed. We only have one ambulance left that's operational." Omar felt his blood run cold. One ambulance for an entire hospital full of patients who might need emergency evacuation. "How many patients do we have who cannot be moved on foot?" he asked, already knowing the answer would break his heart. "3 critical cases, doctor," Hassan replied, his voice trembling. "And they all need to get to the southern hospital immediately if they're going to survive." Dr. Omar closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process what he was being told. In all his years of medicine, he had never faced a situation like this. How do you choose between 3 lives when you've sworn an oath to save them all? The first patient was 22-year-old Fatima, a young mother who had given birth to her first child just 3 days earlier. Complications during delivery had left her in critical condition, and she needed immediate surgery that Al-Shifa could no longer provide safely. In the maternity ward, her newborn baby was crying for his mother, not knowing that her life hung in the balance. Fatima's husband, Mahmoud, had been pacing the hospital corridors for hours, praying for a miracle. This young couple had been married for only 2 years. They had dreamed of starting their family in peaceful times, but now their happiness was threatened by circumstances beyond their control. The second patient was 68-year-old Abu Ahmad, a beloved grandfather and retired teacher who had taught 3 generations of children in Gaza. He had suffered a massive heart attack and needed to be connected to advanced life support equipment that was only available at the Southern Hospital. His 5 children and 14 grandchildren had gathered around his bed, holding his hands and whispering prayers. Abu Ahmad had spent his entire life educating the children of Palestine. Even in his retirement, he would sit in the neighborhood square every afternoon, helping young students with their homework. He was the kind of man who made an entire community better just by being in it, and now his large family faced the possibility of losing their patriarch. The third patient was 8-year-old Layla, but she was not just any child. She was Dr. Omar's own niece, his brother's daughter. She had been brought to the hospital unconscious after being injured during the evacuations. The little girl who called him Uncle Doctor and always asked to listen to his stethoscope was now fighting for her life on a hospital bed. Omar's brother Khalil sat beside his daughter's bed, tears streaming down his face. "Please, Omar," he whispered to his brother. "She's just a baby. She hasn't even lived yet. How do you look your own brother in the eyes and tell him you might not be able to save his child?" Dr. Omar stood in the hospital corridor, looking at 3 rooms, 3 families, 3 lives that depended on his decision. His hands were shaking, his heart was breaking, and time was running out. Outside, the sounds of evacuation were getting closer. Soon, even the decision would be taken away from him. In moments like these, Dr. Omar thought about why he had become a doctor in the first place. It wasn't for money or prestige, it was because he believed that every life was precious, that every person deserved a chance to live, to love, to dream. But now the very principles that had guided his career were being tested in the cruelest way possible. As he stood there, Omar remembered something his father had told him when he was just a young boy. "Son, being a doctor in Palestine means carrying the weight of impossible choices. But remember, every life you save is a victory against those who want us to lose hope." How can we live in a world where doctors are forced to make such choices? Where children like little Layla have to fight for their lives instead of playing with toys? When will humanity learn that peace is not just the absence of war, but the presence of justice and compassion for all people? The clock on the hospital wall showed 11:15. The ambulance driver, a brave young man named Youssef, approached Dr. Omar. "Doctor, we need to leave now. The roads will be too dangerous soon." Who are we taking?" Dr. Omar closed his eyes and made the most difficult decision of his medical career. He walked into the maternity ward where young Fatima was fighting for her life. Her husband looked up at him with desperate hope in his eyes. "We're taking Fatima first," Omar announced. "She's young, she has the best chance of surviving the journey, and she has a newborn who needs his mother." It was a medical decision, but it felt like he was betraying the other 2 families who trusted him. As they loaded Fatima into the ambulance, Omar promised Abu Ahmed's family that he would do everything possible to stabilize their father until another evacuation could be arranged. He promised his brother that he would stay by little Layla's side and fight for her life with everything he had. But promises felt hollow when you're watching an ambulance drive away, knowing it might be the last chance for the patients left behind. What happened next was something that Dr. Omar would never forget. As the ambulance disappeared into the night carrying Fatima to safety, the hospital staff, the families of the patients, even other sick people who could barely stand, all came together in a way that showed the true spirit of the Palestinian people. Abu Ahmed's eldest son, a mechanic, somehow managed to repair an old hospital van that had been out of service for months. "My father taught me that when there's no solution, you create one," he said, working through the night with whatever tools he could find. Meanwhile, Dr. Omar stayed by his niece's bedside, using every technique he had learned in 12 years of trauma surgery. He monitored her vital signs constantly, adjusted her medications by the minute, and refused to leave her side even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. By dawn, a miracle had occurred. The makeshift van was running, and little Layla had stabilized enough to be transported. Abu Ahmad, surrounded by the love of his large family, was also strong enough for the journey south. In a convoy of hope, the repaired van, 2 private cars, and even a neighbor's old truck, the remaining patients and their families made their way to safety together. It wasn't the medical evacuation they had planned, but it was something more powerful. It was a community refusing to let anyone be left behind. Dr. Omar rode in the van with his niece, holding her small hand as they traveled through the checkpoints and barriers that divided their homeland. As he watched the sun rise over the hills of Palestine, he made a silent promise, not just to Layla, but to all the children of his homeland: "One day, you will wake up to mornings filled with peace instead of fear." 3 weeks later, all 3 patients had made full recoveries. Fatima returned home to her husband and baby son. Abu Ahmad was back in the neighborhood square, helping children with their homework. And little Layla was running around her uncle's house again, asking if she could play with his stethoscope. But the story of that night taught Dr. Omar something profound about his calling as a healer in Palestine. Sometimes, the greatest medicine is not found in hospitals or ambulances, it's found in the unbreakable spirit of a people who refuse to give up on each other, who turn impossible choices into opportunities for miracles. When will the children of Palestine, the children of all nations, be able to dream of becoming doctors to heal people instead of to save them from wars? When will mothers give birth in hospitals prepared for celebration instead of evacuation? The answer lies not in the hands of politicians or armies, but in the hearts of ordinary people who choose compassion over hatred, peace over conflict. If you don't want doctors like Omar to face such impossible choices anymore, please like this video so these stories can reach more people around the world. Right now, thousands of people are watching this story. Let's make sure Dr. Omar's voice, and the voices of all medical heroes in Palestine, are heard everywhere. Can you imagine if your own father were a doctor forced to choose between saving lives? Can you imagine if your own child were lying in a hospital bed, waiting for an ambulance that might never come? Think about the last time you visited a hospital for a routine checkup. How different would it feel if that hospital were under threat of evacuation? Every like, every comment shows that heroes like Dr. Omar are not forgotten. If you believe that every child deserves to grow up in a world where hospitals are places of healing, not evacuation, leave a Palestinian flag emoji in the comments. Subscribe to our channel to show that you stand with medical professionals who risk everything to save lives. Tomorrow we'll bring you another story that will remind you of the power of human courage in the darkest of times. Don't miss it. Subscribe so we can continue sharing these important stories of hope and resilience from Palestine. Will you share a prayer for doctors like Omar and all the children of Palestine in the comments? They need our support, our voices, our commitment to peace. Show your reaction, let them know that their stories matter, and that the world is watching. Note, the names mentioned in this story have been changed for privacy purposes. This story is inspired by real events experienced by medical professionals during times of conflict in Palestine.